The letter of Jude, more accurately, Judah, according to the pronunciation in Greek and Hebrew. Judah was the Jesus of four brothers who renamed the gospel accounts. None of his brothers followed Jesus the Messiah before his death. Afterward, they saw him alive from the dead and then became the disciples. All his brother Jesus became leaders eventually in the first Jewish Christian communities, and Judah was known as a traveling teacher and missionary, and he gives a background to understanding the purpose of this letter. I don't know a specific church community who wrote to, but it was likely made of most Islamic Jews. His writing style assumes a deep knowledge of Hebrew and Old Testament scriptures, as well as popular Jewish literatures. And Judah has become aware that Christ is facing the churches, so help us understand what the letter designed. So it begins opening charge followed by a long warning of accusations against the corrupt teachers who influence the churches. And Judah closes completing the charge about what this church is supposed to do. Judah begins by charging the church by content to the true Christian faith. And his plan is to write a longer work that explored our shared salvation through the Messiah. And the project, he says, got delayed, which he heard the urgent news about the new church, say far off, in a very thoughtful, very short letter. Judah begins with how they content with the faith. Rather, he first goes into why. Because the corrupt teachers who infiltrated the churches, it's not their teaching that target, but their way of life. Their moral compromise tells you that they have a bad theology. First of all, they distorted God's grace as a license to sin. So they think forgiven is not God's spirit, so now they can do whatever they want, especially when it comes to money and sex. So Judah says that they betrayed Jesus by rejecting the authority and his teachings. And Judah wants the churches to know that the parents of the teachers has no surprise. Transition to a longer warning to stay away from them. He first offers two sets of three Old Testament examples. Here, three is about the rebellion people who received divine judgment. The Israelites who rebelled against God in the wilderness, they got what they wanted. They died out the middle of nowhere. And there brings out the story about the angels who imprisoned for rebellion until the face of God's justice, referring to the narration and story in Genesis 6. Offered the popular Jewish book called the Enoch, where the sons of God were omnipotent that referred to the angels who rebelled against God, that accepted sex and women and were judged accordingly. Judah links the story, the third example about the ruined Sodom of Gomorrah and Gina, that violent men tried to have sex with angels. These third stories were rebellion against God, order that led to sexual immorality, that this precision that were corrupt teachers were the guilty of. The Judah bring into bonus examples of popular Jewish text called the Jewish Testament of the Torah of Moses. And like Enoch, it is not a part of the Old Testament scriptures. They're created the retelling of Moses' final day and the word of the base of Deuteronomy. The section Judah quotes from, Moses had died, and there was a good angel, Michael, refuting the devil's accusation about against Moses, decided to leave the final judgment for God alone. The stories might seem this odd to you, but for the Jewish people raised on this literature, Judah's warning makes good sense. The behaviors of corrupt teachers have ancient roots, rebelling against God's authority, sexual morality, and rejecting God's messengers. This connects to the second three of the examples. It's about the rebels who went to corrupt other people. So Cain, he murdered his brother, but then he went to rebuild the city of violence and renamed. But there had been a sorcerer who argued cursed Israel, and so he lured idolatry, sexual corruptions. And Korah, the leader that lead the rebellion against Moses, ended in a disaster for others. I can conclude the second three of the rebellion of the Old Testament images that describe the old teachers. As I self the shepherds of Ezekiel, and the clouds were no rain from Proverbs. They're like the chaotic waves from Isaiah. Their self-absorption betrayed the claims to follow Jesus. They create chaos wherever they go. They conclude their warning a quotation from two other warnings, one ancient and one recent. The first comes from the popular book of the Enoch. I proclaim the Cain, the vision of the ancient figure Enoch from the book of Genesis. Now fascinating, the Judah's quote from the opening chapter of Enoch is self-quoting about the half a dozen Old Testaments, the final days of the Lord, justice, and human evil. And Judah echoes in its warning of more recent and from the apostles. Peter, John, Paul, and they all predicted the corrupt teachers would rise and distort good news about Jesus, and they also would echo in Jesus' early warning about the same things. And the church should no more convincing. The teachers have to be dealt with. As Judah had this move to the closing charge, he picks an opening line about the contending of her faith, and unpacks how to do so with a cool set of metaphors. He describes the communion of Jesus as a God's new temple. He describes the builded lives on the foundation of the most holy faith. And it refers to the core message of good news about Jesus' life and the death and the resurrection for our sins. And a foundation, church to build itself through the dedication to prayers and devoting itself to the love of God through the obedience. And the integrity of building this will be maintained by staying alert to the return of Jesus to bring His justice and His mercy. And doing this, they will help each other and stay faithful to Jesus. To conclude by the praising the God who protects His own people and keep them from falling from His grace. The short letter Jude is a powerful and puzzling for many modern readers who ask why the quote the texts that aren't today considered part of the Hebrew Bible, like phrasing on the Old Testament of Moses. It's important to remember that Jewish culture in the time was immersed in a religious text. As Jesus as found in the early Jewish Christians were grew up reading the Hebrew Bible and many other later books that were based on the inspired by the scriptures. And we know that there are ancient debates whether or not some of the later books should not view the scriptures. And regardless, they were still important. The book doesn't have to be in the Bible to speak an important message about God's people. And so many Jewish texts from the period, and on today, is a collection of apocalypse, and it's also called the Deuteronomy canon, along the Surah. These were all preserved, read in the Jewish Christian communities. They're treated with great respect. That doesn't mean they were originally designed as part of the Hebrew Bible, but they're part of the biblical traditions. So Judah, knowing that readers from them know value the words from the first Enoch, he used them to communicate the message, and which is this: God's grace through Jesus demands whole life response, not just not extra sentiment. But Judah doesn't recognize or focus on the teacher's theology, but their moral way of life that denies Jesus. But this Judah is implying that Jesus first told his disciples, if you really love me, then you should obey my teaching. For Christians, now you live is the most reliable indicators of what you actually believe. So that's what the letter of Jude is all about.